So good evening, everyone. We're very pleased to have with us this evening Erica McAlister from the Natural History Museum. Erica is probably, dare I say it, she might shake her head, this country's most famous dipterist, I don't know. She's written 2 books on flies, as far as I know. And she's going to be talking to us this evening about flies, no surprise there. And she's going to be referring, I think, mostly to her latest book, The Making of a Marvel, The Inside Out of Flies. Erica, we're looking forward to your talk.
Thank you. No, there's very much more important people than me about flies. I've just got the largest mouth when it comes to talking about them. So I love them. And I do love flies. And I've been very, very lucky to work at the Natural History Museum for the last 15 years or so, which in museum terms makes me a toddler. There's still a long way in my career to go. And I've been really good at being doing lots of research with the collections, but also traveling around the world studying flies. Some of it's very glamorous. So the bottom left, I'm in the church forest of Ethiopia, but I do deal with flies. So often it's not so glamorous. This is me hoovering a pig in a cow shed at Hounslow City Zoo. That was a huge highlight of my career. And yes, there's me taking a photo of some cow feces, a cow pat on the Isle of Scilly. So flies are extraordinary because they have led me to some of the most interesting places. But it's their ability to get into these places that actually I'm finding really fascinating at the moment. And it's actually the structure of flies and how they're able to exist in arguably most places on the planet where a lot of other species can't get. Now, I'm not the first person to look at flies, and I'm definitely not going to be the last one. I mean, when we first started looking down a microscope, Robert Hooke did it brilliantly in his book, Micrographia. He grabbed things near and dear to him. And so many of those were flies. And what is probably the first proper example of a taxonomic fail is he describes this as a hoverfly, when obviously you all know it's a horsefly. But what he did have right was he was really looking at the structure. This is a male horsefly, and you can tell because his eyes are touching each other. We call it holyptic when you've got that, because he's looking for the ladies. So he needs the better vision because that's what he's interested in. She's not interested in him at all. She's just interested in food. There's a life lesson there. But we have been studying them for 300, 400 years down a microscope, and still there is so much for us to understand. But nowadays we've got some amazing technology at our fingertips. So this is the close-up of a blue bottle in your face. It's a fantastic beast, this wonderful female, highlighting some of the diverse structures that we're really interested in, not just for taxonomy, but also to understand how they behave, how they get around, what they do, etc. So you can see the antennae, the eyes, the bristles, all of this, which is so helpful to both it and us in trying to identify it. So first off, what is a fly? I know this is probably irrelevant to most of you, but one thing I like about flies is they're very sneaky. So they're like all insects. You've got 3 true pairs of legs. There is a joke with crane flies that not all of them are designed to have legs because they fall off at any opportunity. And then they have the 3 body segments, your head, your thorax, and your abdomen. But what makes a fly, a true fly, a dipteran? Well, as adults, they have suctorial mouth parts. So they can't bite you. You talk about being bitten by a fly. They can't. They can slice and maim and shred and rip open your flesh, but they can't actually bite you. They have 1 pair of wings as an adult. And behind them, as you can see in this crane fly, the second pair of wings has been modified into what are called halteres. And these are the balancing organs, the gyroscopic organs that enable them to be arguably the best flyers on the planet. They can loop the loop, they can fly up and down, they can walk on the ceiling. They are brilliant. But flies, as I said, are sneaky. So there's many flies that don't have mouth parts as adults, that don't have wings, and they don't have halteres. Yay, go flies. So they are definitely a group of animals to keep you on your toes. And flies, like a lot of the insects, go through a complete life cycle. So when we talk about the flies, we don't just think about the adults, the ones flying around, we think about their larvae. So look at this little cute, adorable little face. Well, it's not, it's the bottom of a crane fly larvae. Yes, you are looking at how it breathes because those eyes are actually spiracles. And so they have these wonderful faces that enable us to identify them. And it's not just for silliness, nature being funny, it's actually really important because the fly now, the larvae, can concentrate the head end on feeding because the larval stage is all about eating. It's laying down reserves to enable it to metamorphosize into some of the most amazing and extravagant creatures out. I love them. These are various examples of different crane flies, just to show you some of the incredible morphology that goes on. They're like little faces grinning up at you, all sorts of things. I describe them as Tamagotchi. They're just so amazing. So next time you're in your garden and you do see some crane fly larvae or some leather jackets, honestly, have a look at their bottoms because you will see some of these features. Now, having this larval stage and adult stage that a very different morphology has enabled them to exploit different niches. So you often get absolutely no overlap between the larval generation and the adult generation. And so this enabled them to get in and explore and eat absolutely everything. Ooh. They are a mega diverse, mega rich because of this. They have exploited so many different habitats. Globally, we've described about 165,000 so far, of which there's 7,000 in the UK. So as I said, there's more flies in the UK than there are mammals on the planet. There are more flies in the UK than there are beetles, butterflies and moths added together. And we still haven't got anywhere near describing them. So not only are they species rich, but they're incredibly abundant. I mean, if any of you have been to Scotland in the summer and you've come across the swarms, or you've been to the Great Lakes when you've got the massive emergencies, not emergencies, then you'll see just how many there are. And this is really important for food webs, but they're also incredibly morphologically diverse. We've got flies with a red head here. I mean, why it's got a red head, we don't know. We've got really hirsute, fluffy individuals. We've got ones with really long mouth parts with strange eyes. All of this, everything basically goes on. And this enables them to be so ecologically diverse because you name it, they eat it. From decomposers to predators, the parasitoids, the sanguivores, and more importantly, the pollinators. Everybody forgets about the flies and their role in pollination, but you wouldn't have chocolate if it wasn't for the flies. Now, I don't like chocolate, so I'd happily give that up, but most people would be absolutely devastated if they were to lose chocolate. They're very, very important. So in this talk, I'm going to talk you through the body of a fly and explain some of the amazing morphology of them in how I wrote about this book, and also why it's important and some of the little tricks they get up to. And the whole thing about flies is they spend a lot of time looking after themselves because they've got so much sensory equipment, they are always cleaning. When they talk about them being dirty and grubby, they're not. But we are, and they do like hanging around with us. So the head is where most of the sensory equipment is located. So you've got the obvious eyes. This is a real good case of very obvious eyes, but you've also got the hearing, you've got the feeding, you've got all sorts of things going on. Now, these flies, we've affectionately or obviously called the big-eyed flies. I think you can see why. These are called pedunculids, and they just show you how many individual ommatidia, these eye facets that flies have. Now, we talk about dragonflies having the most. There's about 30 to 35,000 on a dragonfly, and they're meant to be the best flyers, best visualizers. But flies just have to play their own game at absolutely everything. And within each photo unit, instead of having the fused photo cells that all the other insects have, these are split once more back into individual units. So down a single ommatidia, down a single rod where they pick up all the photo images, they can now take 7 separate images. So they may have less ommatidia than the rest of the insects, but they have within that a much greater acuity. So when you've tried to swipe a fly, which obviously none of you have done because that is very wrong, have you noticed that they just laugh at you and they can easily get out of the way? It's because you appear absolutely slow motion to them. So if you want to catch one to release it nicely into your garden, etc., just go incredibly slowly, because they don't perceive that therefore as movement. It's only when you go like that, they go, ooh, and move out of the way. Now, interestingly, in this picture, we've got a male and female adult fly doing what adult flies are designed to do. And usually it's the males that have larger eye facets because he's the one looking for the females. But in this case, you've got a parasitoid. These, the females, have to find a host for their larvae. So she's the one who's got these, what we call love spots. They are actually called love spots in the front of her eyes, where she can look for her the hosts, which in this case is going to be bugs and things like that for her larvae. Because flies, I think, arguably are the flirtiest creatures on the planet. They have taken so much of their body and reorganized it to be able to flirt with. This one now is just to show you how some of them are amazing, even though they're incredibly tiny. This is an apex predator. Okay, it's a vicious beast. It goes around, kills and shreds everything. But that's my friend's finger to show you how small some of these creatures can be. But getting back to the flirting, so they don't just have their eyes just for looking. This is called Achius rothschildii, and it is one of the stalk-eyed flies. So this is growing its eyes along at the end of these stalks. And this is absolutely an amazing thing. So during the pupal stage, where they reorganize their body tissue from the larval stage to the adult stage, the optic nerve develops, and you can see it growing and growing. So it's this little concertina, this little coiled spring, that when it bursts out of the pupa, they engulf in a lot of air and they just burst out their eye stalks. And these males do exactly what male deer do. They rut. So they will form little pegs, and they will actually, if they're a similar size, they headbutt each other, or they get up on their feet and they have little fights with their front pairs of legs. It's rather cute. And I spent hours, instead of doing field work, watching them fighting each other, which was not very professional of me, but there's something quite amazing about that. And again, what is quite remarkable is that this hasn't just happened once. It's independently happened 22 times in flies. There's a level of plasticity, of rapid development that goes on in flies that we really don't see elsewhere. Another part that's located on the head are the mouth parts. But not all adults have mouth parts. This is a very adorable, very hirsute little fluffy fly, very much resembling a bumblebee. It's not a bumblebee though. And in many ways it pretends to be a bee, so it distracts its hosts who doesn't worry, because this is a botfly. This is a reindeer botfly. We just passed Christmas, but this is indeed one of those. Why do you think Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a red nose? Because he had a botfly living up it. And she will squirt up to 200 larvae into the nostrils of a reindeer. And it is the larval stage that the feed is, not the adult. She basically has a tiny sip of water, and that's it in a couple of weeks that she's an adult. Now, this is really interesting. We've been unsure in many ways of what goes on in the pupal stage from them as a larvae when they've laid down so much fat, so many deposits to the adult. We've been unsure, but we've now got technology to enable us to explore this properly, such as MicroCT scanning. So these are some of my colleagues at work. We've got Daniel Martin Vega and Martin Hall, and they've been working at CT scanning. So my mum went in for a CT scan the other day. So they've got a much bigger one in the hospital, and we've got tiny ones at work. And we put these living flies, these living pupal cases into the CT scan, and we're able to look at the development over a couple of days from the larval stage, the final larval stage, to get the emergence at the adult. And what you're seeing here, the green color, is the gut, and how it starts off enormous and then it basically shrinks down to nothing. There is no need for it as an adult because they don't feed. And so we're seeing all of this change in how the lipids are dispersed, the salivary glands, etc. And it's really interesting to finally understand what's going on. This is another botfly. And this is actually, I've highlighted this botfly, exactly the same. So the adult stage is short-lived. It's the larval stage that is very important. This is because the botflies are so dependent on their host. This is a conservation issue because this is actually the Rhino Botfly. So Natural History Museum has just done some wildlife podcasts and they're highlighting the impact of wildlife crime. And interesting, a secondary impact is the loss of this species. I know it's never going to get the same highlight as a rhino, but it has exactly the same value and exactly the same right to exist on its planet. And it is critically endangered because it has to actually go and find its hosts. And most of its hosts now are protected and given lots of strong antibiotics, which sadly will get rid of these quite harmless little beasties. But they do have mouth parts, most of them. Some of them have extraordinary ones. This is Microscope Longirostrus, okay, and it's one of the twisted wing flies founded in South Africa. And as you can see, it's got an enormous mouth part. And in fact, this is the longest mouth part in relation to body size of any animal or any insect, sorry. So they talk about, what is it, Darwin's moth. In fact, I talked about it on a radio series, and that's good, but this is better because it's a fly. But unlike a moth, it can't curl up its mouth part. So what it does is it has to fly with its head down, and basically the mouth part flips back like a little hook. And so it flies along with a mouth part flying out behind it, which is arguably one of the most weirdest things I've seen in the field when it comes to flies flying around. But these are guild pollinators. They've co-evolved with many of the endemic plants in the Cape region of South Africa. If this species of fly dies out, 8 species immediately go extinct. They are so important. We have our own long-tongued flies in the UK. This is arguably the best animal in the UK. It's the Bombylius major, the dark-edged bee fly. And these amazing photos were taken by Tim Woolfolk, showing again how our own species has this extendable mouth part, which enables it to get in really into the long tubed early flowering plants that we have in spring. This is definitely one of the indicators that spring has arrived in the UK, and always leaves me hours late for work when I'm not working at home. My request is there's a little URL site here for our recording scheme about these, because we're trying to find out as much information about them, especially the emergence of males and the emergence of females, because we want to see what's going on now. There's another mouth part that some of you are more intimately related, connected with, and that is the mouth parts of mosquitoes. It's my favorite quote here. A mosquito is often seen as one of the worst creatures on the planet, and they talk about them causing more deaths than anything else, whereas an actual mosquito has never killed anyone. I've looked it up. It would take about 414,000 mosquitoes to feed on you at any one time for you to have enough blood loss for you to die. And we don't have that much skin. They can't fit on. Yes, they're important vectors, and it's that we must think about them. They are literally being manipulated by the plasmodium or the filariasis or whatever they're carrying. The plasmodium, much in the same way with the plague and the flea, it causes them to feed more. It causes them to change their behavior, to become more risky. So mosquitoes have been living alongside us for millennia, and it's all been fine, but these little plasmodium causing problems. But if you've ever noticed, you very rarely know when a mosquito is feeding on you. You pay attention afterwards when you suddenly react. And a lot of smart people have been thinking about this, going, well, what's this going on? And we're realizing it's because they're producing a very small amount of, it's easy to say a venom, because it basically neuralizes. It has an, I always have a problem with this word. It's an anti-histamine. It causes you not to react at all. And it paralyzes, anesthetic, thank you. It paralyzes your skin slightly, so you don't know what's going on. And then, amazingly, those long stylets, those long mouth parts, if you look in the little diagram, when they're under the skin, they can be manipulated. So they actually move around under your skin because they've got chemosensors at the end. They can sniff out your blood. Now, that might sound a bit grotesque and a bit, ugh, But it's amazing because doctors are beginning to think about development of smart needles. So they are actually thinking, hold on, if we've got to do any sort of neurological surgery or things near delicate tissues, the idea of being able to externally manipulate needles, etc., around very sensitive tissues is a very critical one. And the second thing about mosquito mouthparts is actually, you know, when they penetrate the skin, it's not that you just don't feel it, it's that they can do it really quickly. So how on earth can they do this without you knowing? And they've realized, they've been studying it, and they've realized their mouthparts act as a pneumatic drill. So they are tiny little drills and they drill in really quickly. And in doing so, that they can use 400 times less force than if they were to try and stab their mouthparts in one go. Now, we've all been pricked a lot recently, what with the amount of vaccinations and boosters we've had. And so they're developing, again, needles that operate in this system to enable those with a lot more needle phobia than, say, I have, to be able to deal with this where it's less invasive and less painful. So actually, we have to thank the mosquitoes for a little bit. And the final bit on their head is their antennae. Now, this is really good at sensory. This is how they listen, they hear. Then some of them have got extraordinary features. We've got paddles here and nice bifurcate things going on. We've also got curly whirly. This is not just used for listening. This is to mark out his territory. So he marks out his very long antennae. But we've got others that have not just antennae in their head, they've got it on their body. So you can see a satsuma here on the side, just below the eye and below the hole, which is spherical. And this enables these flies to hear better. Because obviously it's quite hard to triangulate when you're a tiny fly that's 3 millimeters long and you've got no big gap like I have between my two ears to enable me to triangulate. So they developed this this rocking organ, and this is able to amplify the sound. So now a 3 millimeter fly can hear a distance of a very long distance comparison to itself, 40, 50 centimeters, to hear the host of its larvae. And what we've done now is developed microphones, we've developed loudspeakers, and we're developing hearing aids based on this fly's technology. We get to the fly as a whole, we've got bristles all over it. They're the bane of my life when it comes to identification, because they all mean something apparently. We don't know what they mean yet. But some of them have pits in them that have these chemosensors, mechanoreceptors, and they're able for it to sense the air around it. So it's really good at flying. It's not just good at flying though. These hairs, along with the lipids, the lipids from their exoskeletons that they exude, have enabled them to get into really quite fun places. Some of them scuba dive. So this is one that's found, I mean, we have many insects that scuba dive, Erica. What's this one so amazing? Well, this is scuba diving in the most saline environment on the planet. These are the Mono Lakes in California. So this is like hugely more saline than the sea. And in normal conditions, therefore, the chemistry, the hydrocarbons on the cuticles of these flies would be completely disrupted and they wouldn't be able to form this plastron, this air bubble. But thanks to the incredible arrangement of the bristles and the unique lipids, these hydrocarbons that they're producing, they're able to scuba dive down to the bottom of the lake where their larvae can easily live and feed on all the rest of this dead and decaying matter that's fallen into these really toxic environments without fear of anything predating on them. And what I really like is have a look. The eye is uncovered. So how this has evolved, how this is amazing, that they can still have this amazing vision underwater. And when she climbs down, when to get herself out of the water, she just lets go. And because of the angle that she penetrated, she generates force as she goes down. And when she lets go, she just pings straight back up outside the water. That's definitely a holiday I want to go and have a look at. On their middles, we got the legs. So the thoracic section is more about the locomotions. We have the bristles, which are everywhere, but there's loads of them in there. And then you've got the locomotion, which is the legs or the wings. Now, legs aren't just for walking, they are for flirting. And these are some of the dance flies. And the dance flies are the biggest flirts when it comes to the flies. And they are all about giving gifts. Sadly, Christmas is gone and we've stuffed ourselves silly. But as everyone knows, that the best way to a female's heart is to give her a gift, give her presents. And that's more likely, if it was me, give me some food. So these flies do that because the females don't hunt at all. The males have to do all the work. Brilliant. But more often than not, she's finished her food before he's finished his romantic outings, and she will leave him. So they've come to various different ways of trying to figure out how to slow down this process. And the fly on the right, another type of empid, it has got these enlarged sacs at the base of its feet. And these are silk glands. So they will wrap up presents. They will catch a fly and they will wrap it up. So it's like a beautifully presented box of chocolate. But the one in the middle is even sneakier. He doesn't bother wrapping up anything. No, he makes a salival balloon. So this is his saliva. He's blown up into a balloon. And he's dancing around, waving these balloons at the ladies. And they're like, no, okay, they're dying. But there's some very, very clever males and all of this lot. And they're like, hold on a minute. The females aren't doing any work. Why should we bother? In fact, let the females impress us. And in one of the very few examples of role reversal where females have the secondary sexual characteristics, and these flies, there is that. And there's a group where she's able to, basically, she has very hairy legs and she has massive wings and she has what are called reversible air sacs on her abdomen. And she blows them up. So she blows up her massive bum. So mid-air, she's dancing with a big bum with her hairy legs wrapped around it and her wings like that. And the males love it. And she's meant to be showing how fecund she is. Look at my wonderful area for raising your babies in. And it's great. You can see those in Scotland. But yeah, wings. It's all about flying with flies in their name. This is the New Zealand cannibal fly. It's New Zealand, all right, but it's not a cannibal. I don't know where these common names ever came from. It's actually a type of house fly. But it's a great example of males with massively exaggerated characteristics where he's doing this presumably to show off for the ladies. Some of the best flyers are obviously the hoverflies. And these are some of the UK examples. Some of them are from my garden, which is very nice. We have 300 or so species in the UK, really nice, diverse group, a lot of them incredibly hirsute, and obviously some really excellent pollinators in them. And some of the good things about their pollination is their flight abilities, because some of these are long distance migrators. And we're so used to thinking about things like birds migrating and turtles and all of this. And when it comes to insects, we think about maybe the monarchs and a few dragonflies. But there's a lot of research that's come out over the last 5 years about these long distance migrations from hoverflies from Northern Africa and Eastern Europe all the way over to the UK and back every year. In fact, they've looked at the aerial plankton and they worked out it's between 1 and 4 trillion, I think it's something like that, insects that migrate, with a majority of them being the flies. This is one of the good migrators, this Episurfus bautiatus, the marmalade hoverfly. And these are able to cover extreme distances. Now, this is superb when it comes to conservation genetics of plants, because they're so high up in the aerial fauna, they're able to look down on often what are isolated or relic populations and able to pass pollen amongst different plant groups. So this is really good at preventing a bottleneck. Now, so when it comes to climate change and the impacts of land use and all of these other things, these flies are bucking the trend because they've got such amazing ability to move and migrate across these areas. And it's not just them that are brilliant, it's their larvae. Because unlike baby bees that don't do anything, fly larvae are very important when it comes to ecosystem services as well. So we had some before, we had the crane flies and their decomposers, and some of the other hoverflies decomposers, and they're really good at nutrient recycling. These are predators. Yeah, vicious. Look at it. I know it might look like a bit like bird poo, but actually it's a very important predator because these are aphidophagus. They love nothing more than eating aphids, and they can munch over 300 to 300 to 400 before they become an adult. So they save our biological control units. So the adults are exceptionally good pollinators. In fact, 2 hoverflies, Episurfus boltiatus, and the Eupioides corolli, I believe it's that species, those 2 between them are thought to do as much work as the honeybees. They really are important. We're only just beginning to get the research. Plus, you add on the crop service, the genetic impact of these species, conservation impact of them transferring to genes, plus their larval munching abilities. They really are tip-top species. We're looking now, we've been using recording schemes in the UK for a long time, as I'm sure you're all thoroughly aware of, to look at what's going on with the UK population. This is lovely work going on with the hoverfly recording scheme, and they're mapping the migration of the movement of Bollicella zonaria, which turned up in the UK over 100 years ago, and how it's now marching its way up north. I mean, it's a good pollinator, so it's not a problem. But thanks to everyone's efforts with all these recording schemes, it's really useful for us to actually map and figure out what's going on. Not all flies have wings. There's some really adorable, cute wingless ones. This is a little teddy bear. Look, it's very sweet. We basically eradicated this by mistake in the UK because this is found on the honeybee, as you can see here on the left. Now, these are called kleptoparasites. It's brolids. These are bee riders, which is a lovely, I think of them as like riding around in their Harley Davidsons, the Harleys being the bees. And they're not actually detrimental to the honeybee. Beekeepers, when trying to find out what was going on, when I was asking all them, they were like, oh no, we don't really know. And I'm like, they're kleptos. So they are changing them, calling them parasites to kleptoparasites. And what they do is these adults, when they're generally found on the queen bee, when they're feeding, they go down to the mouth parts and they will feed all the food around their mouth parts. If any of you males have beards, I think it would be really an idea. They can go around and clean the food out of your beards and then move off again, whatever. But they are, when the varroa mite turned up and we put the miticides in, we wiped out these rather than the mite. So luckily, that was only on the mainland UK, and we are beginning to get them back now because they are quite amazing creatures. Recently, we've been learning a little bit more about them because they obviously, how on earth the queen, I mean, so they're not doing her much damage. It's going to be quite weird, a huge foreign creature walking around your body, and how on earth is this happening? And again, this is due to the chemicals released by the queen. So these hydrocarbons on her that every insect releases. And we found out that the little bee rider actually mimics exactly the same chemical makeup as she does. Now, I say mimic because we're not actually quite sure, because we're not sure whether they just smother themselves in essence of bee or whether they actually generate it themselves. And this has huge impacts when it comes to, say, pheromone issues, when we can think about crops and protecting crops and saying, actually, don't come here because there's this species here. So these are really good examples of understanding the biochemistry of these different insects will have a much bigger impact. I'm quite addicted to this parasite that's got no wings. These are bat flies. And when it's not having a pandemic, I'm in the Caribbean looking at these flies. That's a bit annoying. I could be on a beach drinking rum, but I'm in my shed in the garden in London. And but these are quite fascinating because not only do they have no wings, a lot of them don't have any horn hairs. And if you see the one on the right, it's basically got no thoracic muscles. It's gone bleh. And in collapsing, the head now is basically held, when it's not feeding, held flat against the back of the back. So they look weird. They look weird. They're morphologically weird because these flies give birth to live young. So this is something we don't think about with insects. We don't think about it with birds. But yes, these, in fact, the females have lactating glands on the inside, so the larvae will suckle. So she really does get pregnant, and she exhibits a huge amount of parental care. And we get on to the last subject, talking about parental care, because the last subject, the abdomen, is all about the naughty bits. And basically, this is why the adult flies are there. And this is a soldier fly. I affectionately call these the fat bottom flies. I think you can see why. And many of the females have these hugely weird, distorted abdomens because they're showing the males that they are able to look after loads of eggs or develop loads of eggs. They're incredibly fecund. It's brilliant. But before I race down that, I'll quickly tell you about some of the larvae that also have some interesting things in the abdomen section of them, that some of them glow. If you're lucky enough to go to New Zealand and to see these glowworm capes, and these are the predatory larvae of a fungus gnat, a caraplatid. And what they do is they have these bioluminescent enzymes. They are quite unique to them, but they are work in a similar way as what used to be the other ones. And they will glow, and then they will release these little balls on a string. So they're like fishing. And then the little moth or whatever hapless creature happens to be flying along, attracted by the light. And as they touch them, these little balls contain digestive enzymes and dissolve the insect. And then the little larvae will hook them back up and start feeding. I mean, these larvae are vicious. If one of them goes too close to the adult, they start fighting and trying to eat each other. So you just don't go near them, but they're beautiful to see. But yes, it is all about the genitalia. And mostly we talk about male genitalia, not because we're weird, and we always talk about male genitalia. It's because it's the most fastest evolving structure on the insects. So if they've got different genitalia, then we know we're probably dealing with different species. And mostly it's the males, because the males have got obvious external structures. But there are some groups, such as these. These are the bee or wasp grabbers, the canopids, where you've got some fabulous genitalia of the female, because she uses it to open up bees or wasps to put her little larvae in. And we will identify a lot of them because of their structures, so that's cool. But yes, the males have extraordinary features. This is these are those dance flies. So not only have they got all these flirty legs and all sorts of crazy things of doing, their genitalia is incredible. These Adiegus, these are the penis of the 4 different types of these Ramphomia species. They remind me of those buzzy machines that if you touch them, you get bzzz, and you kind of get, you know what I mean, in the doctor's surgery. Maybe not. There's the forehead up in the right hand corner, kind of looks like a corkscrew, which is quite nice. So you know, you can have a bottle of wine at the same time, which is always rather pleasant. And it's not just these that have adapted to such strange and long interesting things. It's actually because there is a huge amount of fighting going inside the female. So although she doesn't appear to have much difference along the species, which has been the bane of many dipterous life, they get to many a female and go, we can't split them. Actually, what's going on inside is really interesting. For example, it's all very well implanting the sperm, but the sperm has to travel and the sperm has to fight, and the sperm often have to go through very long corridors before it can get to its destination. And so a lot of flies have got what we call megasperm. They've adapted to this. And your common vinegar fly, or fruit fly, that most people call them, Drosophila melanogaster, it's 3 millimeter long fly. Sperm is 1 millimeter long, which is huge, really big sperm. Its cousin, this is Drosophila bifurca. Again, it's 3 millimeters. Its sperm, it's 5.8 centimeters long, which is enormous. That is the equivalent, if it was human, of a blue whale, just to put it in perspective. So this sperm is having to go a long distance. It's fighting. It's trying to kill other sperm. It's trying to do all these sorts of things. And it's also trying to give nutrients to the female. There's all sorts of things. Not over though. We've got a fly, a male that's seen a female. We've got a female that's fed. We've got them. They've copulated. We've got females. They're about to give birth. Doesn't stop with the morphology there. So for example, this is one of those bat flies again. Now she's pregnant, and she is pregnant. And what she does now is really quite extraordinary. So this female, well, again, the smiley face means it's the abdomen. It's not the front end. The front end on this is the top of it. And what she does is she would stuff this into the side of the bat. She then rips her legs off, she rips her wings off, and she invaginates her abdomen around her body. So she completely alters her shape. She looks like a pear. So the only thing you basically see is this kind of pear sticking out with this little smiley face on the side of the bat. And it is from there where she's able to feed and nurture her larvae, which eventually who will fall out and pupate. Fascinating life cycle. Flies, we're only really beginning to understand some of the amazing ways that they've altered their genetic, the variability, their morphological variability, but there's still so much we don't know. And some of the areas I'm really interested in are the neglected venomics groups. So these robber flies, the Acylidae, they're highly venomous, really venomous. They've done some really quite extraordinary experiments finding out not venomous to us. Bit of a shame. But we are looking at them when it comes to medicine, because actually they've got really good neurotoxins and their venoms are unique to science. So the family name is Acylidae, and these new venoms, therefore, they've called acylins. So there's your last fact of tonight. You know now 10 venom names because they're called acylin 1, acylin 2, and so on. So there's still so much fun to learn about them.
In her 2017 work, The Secret Life of Flies, the entomologist Erica McAlister estimated that for each person on Earth, there are how many flies? The figure in question is about the population of Zambia or the Netherlands. You can have 3 million either way.
6 million?
No,
it's 17 million. Amazing, isn't it?
Yes, Jeremy, it's amazing. So there's so many flies out there. There's so much to do. And hopefully in the books I've written, and it scratches the surface a little bit more about what we can know. But we can only keep going with you lot going out there and helping us do all of the identification and understanding. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica. That was great. We do have some dipterists in the audience tonight, I happen to know. So you indicated before the talk that you were happy to take some questions. If anyone's got any questions, can you make yourselves known? You can either type them in the chat box or put your hands up or just speak, whichever you prefer. While people are thinking, oh, I've got one for you. I don't know if this breaks your rule of only nice questions, but anyway, we'll give it a go. What's happening in terms of biodiversity, in terms of UK flies? Do you think we're gaining? I'm not talking about just what we haven't identified yet, but are we gaining species? Are we losing species? What do you feel is going on?
Yes. Yes, we're gaining species. Yes, we're losing species. We've had a steady troop coming across in the last 100 years. Some of those by their own means, most of them not their own means, and it's those ones we're a little bit concerned about. The UK mosquito group are concerned about some of the invasive mosquitoes, one specifically that's found in mainland Europe. There is a mosquito watch going on, and every time it turns up, they go out and eradicate it. So we are concerned about some of those. We're losing some species, although it's really hard to tell, because obviously, as you know, with recording schemes, it's very much dependent on who's in the area to record. So in a lot of the places, we are able to say past or present absence, but whether the population is going up and down, it's quite difficult. The nice thing about a lot of people recently is that we are getting a lot more data when it comes to that. The Rothenstedt traps, they have been used for, is it 30 years? The Rothenstedt traps have been going. These are being able to look at long-term monitoring of insect populations, mostly of aphids and some moths and whatever, but they have been looking at bibionids, so the St. Mark's fly. And sadly, we've seen that population dropping. Roger Morris, Stuart Ball, and a few others have been obviously hugely important when it comes to hoverflies. And they're finding that a lot of the very common ones are stable, if not doing well. And then, surprise, surprise, a lot of the rare ones are not doing so well. So land use change, land use loss, basically, is still the biggest factor, but we are beginning to now being able to actually start properly looking at climate change and things like that. I think we're a long way off. Our gut feeling is it's not good.
I think it's the same situation with crane flies, isn't it? There's some of the rarer species there that are quite site local are in big trouble.
Yeah, this is it. Anything that's got a really local environment, endemic, is always going to be problematic. So have you got? Obviously, you've got the new book.
Absolutely.
Love this book, everyone. You need this book.
I'm not brave enough to do that, but I know we have people in the audience who do. So there we go. Ray, I hope you've got those crane flies I sent you. I don't know if they arrived today or not, but anyway. So do we have any questions for Erica? Anyone want to ask Erica about genitalia or anything else, or mouth parts even? They're very shy tonight. They're not normally shy.
Honestly, I'm not unfriendly.
It must be Christmas. It must be something to do with the effects of Christmas. So no. Okay, well, in that case, what I'll do is just to round off the evening, I'll just ask Hazel if she can formally thank you, and then we'll stop the recording after that. Hazel?
Yeah, right. Thank you. Erica, thank you so much for that talk. I think you've actually stunned us all. The pictures you showed, the information you've passed over. I think it's just wonderful for somebody to be so enthusiastic about the subject, and I think that is what well, natural history in general depends on, people being enthusiastic in a small area, and it sort of encourages everybody else who sort of comes to these talks, sees people like you. It encourages everybody to take an interest and go out there and join in and help to record. So thank you very much for inspiring us all, and it's just so wonderful that people like you are doing what you're doing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.